Nation, the band review has returned, and this is a band that I am armed and extremely dangerous about. Not to mention, this is also one in which you, the nation, have recommended that I do a band review and asked that I do a band review on pretty much since the inception of the band review idea occurred, I believe, in 2011. And so now, finally, after probably about 2 years of your waiting, I present this to you. I am here to present you guys with a band review of the band Avenged Sevenfold. Yeah, you guys have asked me for a long time to talk about this band, talking about, and giving me your personal opinions on this band, and I have this sneaky suspicion that a lot of you actually don't care for this band a lot, whereas another section of you guys tend to think that they're alright. And you want to know what I think about them. So, I'm going to tell you. But first, a little bit of background. Avenged Sevenfold is a band that began at the tail end of the 1990s. I believe them to be a little bit overrated, however. They have released a number of studio albums to this date. They first, at their first inception, had a bit of a metalcore sound to them, but has since transitioned into something that could be considered a little bit more modern metal, a modern metal approach, which really, the turn was executed with their album City of Evil, and has gone further and has had more deviation ever since then, including their self-titled album, as well as the latest, entitled Nightmare. They have, I believe, 6 albums to date, and there is definitely a variance between the early material and the more modern material. Of course, a lot of people really like this band. A lot of people mourned the death of the Rev whenever he passed away a couple of years ago because of an overdose. And it's a band that has a furious and oftentimes very, very dedicated to the point of insanity fan base, which, well, we'll talk about later. Now, this is a group that's been able to incorporate various styles in their music and is certainly been well known by a lot of more traditional metal fans as having a pretty decent guitar player by the name of Sinister Gates. And M. Shadows, their vocalist, has been kind of maligned as well as praised for his vocal styles. However, a lot of people have kind of been clamoring for him to go back to the old style, which is a little bit more resemblant to metalcore. However, there has really been no indication that there is going to be a return to that style, at least not on a permanent basis, which means that it may make a bit of an appearance here and there, but it's doubtful because at this point it really hasn't made much. I've heard songs from these guys that have pushed the boundaries of traditional metal in general. The song Dear God reminds me more of a country ballad than it does anything else, whereas on the very same album, the self-titled White release, A Little Piece of Heaven reminds me a little bit more of something you should hear in either a musical or just, it's something that you would expect from a concept album as opposed to just being a singular track on a singular affair. Now, whenever I am approached with the question of whether or not I like Avenged Sevenfold, I at first have to really summarize everything before I even get the chance to explain myself by saying I really don't care for them much in the studio, but I have seen this band live a couple of times, and they always deliver. They deliver a fantastic live show. It's full of energy, it's full of a lot of interaction, and it's actually one of the only shows that I've ever seen some sort of rambunctiousness. Was actually a show of theirs in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where they were there with Buck Cherry and a couple of other bands, where a fan actually got onto the stage and was tackled by one of their security personnel. It was actually something that I got on video, and I have on another channel of mine here on YouTube, and I will definitely post that link below in the description box for you guys to check out. That being said, they also seem like a kind of a cool group of guys. It really seems like these guys definitely have a lot of fun with what they do. It's not something where they necessarily take themselves overly serious, and they are instead just kind of in it for a lot of the more, humorous and fun aspects of, I guess, being a rock star. They seem down to earth, and of course, the guitar guy from the Jeff Dunham tour happens to be one of the band members' fathers. So there is definitely a connection there. Now, their material in the studio for me, I have minor complaints about, and then I have major complaints about. I will praise Sinister Gates for certainly having a unique guitar tone, one that is instantly recognized. One that a lot of people will know, simply by hearing a couple of notes of his work. That being said, though, I think that is something that has fallen back on far too much. Now, we understand that, guitar gods such as John Petrucci, for example, do have their signature tones, their signature sounds. However, it's something where it is a recognizable feature, but not necessarily the featured event. It's not necessarily something that is heir apparent on each and every track that you hear. It's not the case with Sinister Gates either. However, I feel that the percentage of times where that signature tone is used happens far too often, and it's a lot easier to kind of notice a bit of a trend throughout their albums. It does start to wear on you a little bit, because you kind of want to see a little bit more of an openness and a little more of a diversity. That's the reason why the songs in which they kind of go around their ideas and kind of expand their horizons a little bit tend to resonate a little bit more with me, because these are the tracks where it seems that the entire band is experimenting with something. The entire band is kind of into it, and it's not necessarily something that has to stroke one person's ego. Either that, or it's not something where they are afraid that, considering that signature tone is not being heard, that people will not realize that it is that. As a minor complaint by real scale, that is something where it is very minor. Now, with the songwriting, I do feel that some of the structures are very good. I think that City of Evil actually boasts a lot of very, potent songwriting that is well done, whereas the White Album, the self-titled release, definitely showcases a bit more diversity, while it was kind of starting to post-border on a little bit more commercialism and a little bit more conventionalism. And Nightmare was really an attempt to return to, I guess, bloody roots. Very thrash-heavy, very, very emotional in status, considering this was the first album that they had recorded since the death of their friend the Rev. Now, they, of course, got the help of Mike Portnoy from Dream Theater whenever this occurred. So the drumming definitely was up to par. In fact, it far exceeded par. It was probably closer to a birdie or an eagle, if you want to go with the golf metaphor. However, this was nothing that was meant to be permanent. So, of course, they were drummer shopping for a while until they recently were able to get another one, whose name has escaped me because he seems and sounds useless to me. That said, some other minor complaints that I have are the fact that I feel that they return to some staples far too much. I feel that there are certain elements of their music that they tend to like to come back to. A lot of times it does refer to Sin's signature guitar sound, but I also feel that through kind of only going with clean-only singing, Shadows has kind of one-dimensionalized himself. And he's really started to open up on that with Nightmare and the tail end of the White Album. However, if every single song of theirs was to have that kind of nasally sounding vocal to it, I think it would have gotten annoying very, very quickly. Finally, and perhaps most importantly of all, one of my principal complaints about this band happens to be the fans. Now, is this the fact that the fans are actually to the point where they just are sensational over this band, where they are fanboys and fangirls, and it's just a minor annoyance? This is actually one of those times, and one of those locations, where, with a lot of the other bands that I've talked about, and a lot of the other bands that I've talked shit about, those fans tended to be, for the most part, pretty cool about things. If you bring apart a negative opinion, they tend to be cool about it. They tend to engage you in a conversation, unless, of course, they're a little bit younger. With this group, it is one of those things where they kind of give you a dumbfounded look, like, you don't like Avenged Sevenfold? What the fuck is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? And that is something that I completely and totally really hate. It would be like if I walked up to somebody who was in the rap section at my store and said, "Hey, have you heard of Iron Maiden? Are you a fan of Opeth? Do you really like Sonata Arctica?" And yet, there's also another band. They're new. And if they said no, my reaction would be, "Well, why not? You're a moron!" It's kind of the vibe that I get from some A7X fans. Now, of course, the fans can be a real reason why the music is disliked. I think another one of the main reasons why I can't get into these guys, in the studio at least, is because I feel as though I've heard this sound a lot. And it's really because the modern metal scene, as they call it, bands such as A7X, Bullet for My Valentine, etc., there are minor deviations between these bands. However, they're not large enough to really, I guess, discern them so greatly where you can tell one from the other without a distinct feature. With Avenged Sevenfold, it is Sinister Gate's signature guitar sound, it's a lot of S's, and M Shadow's nasally vocals. So, with this band, it is a little bit easier, and perhaps that's the reason why my bane toward them is very small. And also, in reality, whenever I examine the stuff in the studio, whenever I'm locked in my room, or locked in anywhere, locked in prison, and listen to this stuff, it's not that bad. For me, it is a simple case that this was a band that was completely and totally overplayed, overhyped, and overexposed to me. And it wasn't necessarily all to my will. Some of it was against my will, and some of it was to an absolutely ridiculous extreme. So, what can we determine from this band review? Is A7X actually a band that coverkillernation respects? Or is this secretly going to become a fueling bloodbath? It's not going to become a bloodbath. I actually respect this Avenged Sevenfold. I don't necessarily adore their sound. I don't necessarily like their albums to the point where I find them to be true classics. However, whenever I look at this impartially, whenever I remove the fact that the band was relatively overexposed to me, these guys are actually one of the bands from the modern metal movement that have a lot of talent, that bring a lot to the table, and actually kind of get it. They are definitely some fun-loving dudes. Not to mention, they are definitely guys that possess a lot of talent. Sometimes I feel as though that talent is a little bit underutilized. And sometimes I also find that their talents are a little overhyped. But at the end of the day, they do showcase a lot on their records, and they definitely showcase a lot live. They do get one other thing about heavy metal, really. It's all about the communication, it's all about the message, and it's all about the representation. And they do all three of those things moderately, if not excellently well. So there you have it. One of the very rare band reviews that I have done on this channel that has not ended in a bloodbath. That has not ended in me comparing things to rhinoceros tits or vagina monologues. That hasn't caused me to go off on rampages and involve appliances, either that or other planetary beings. Instead, this is one where I just simply have to sit back and say, like me if you want, hate this opinion if you like, I respect the guys. And maybe that's the reason why I waited so long for this one. Because I thought maybe in time, I would broil up that rage. Maybe in time, something would happen that would cause me to snap and lose it about this band. But that didn't happen. Instead, the respect remains, and I think the respect will continue to remain. Just because I was overexposed doesn't necessarily mean that these guys are absolute shit. After all, there are worse things out there. Blood on the Dance Floor are releasing a new album. That's pretty goddamn bad. And let's face it, the memory still lingers from Temper Temper for Bullet for My Valentine. And hey, Deathcore's still out there. A lot of that sucks. And you know, somewhere in a secluded studio, Lady Gaga is releasing a new album. By comparison, Avenged Sevenfold, they ain't bad at all. In fact, they're pretty good.